Alrighty, so we can get officially started. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time out of your schedules to attend this session. My name is Jack. I'm a librarian here with the Sunnyvale Public Library. I am very pleased to welcome you to this program to discuss The Water Remembers. To present this evening, then, we have a very special guest. Amy Bowers Cordalis is, of course, the author of The Water Remembers. A little more about Amy. She is a mother, fisherwoman, attorney, and a member and former General Counsel of the Yurok Tribe, the largest tribe in California. Formerly a staff attorney at the Native American Rights Fund, she is currently the co-founder and co-director of the Ridges to Riffles Conservation Indigenous Group, a nonprofit representing Native American tribes in natural and cultural resource matters, where she works on advancing tribal sovereignty, water rights, fisheries, and the undamming of the Klamath River. She's also the recipient of the UN's highest environmental honor, Champion of the World Laureate, and in 2024 was named to the second annual TIME100 Climate list, featuring the 100 most influential leaders driving business to real climate change. So, before I have Amy properly introduce herself, once again, we do ask that you turn off your cameras and mute yourself during the presentation. If you do have questions, please feel free to place them into the chat, and we will make sure to attend those at the end of the talk. So, with that, Amy, I will let you take it from here whenever you are ready.
Well, thank you. Ayakli, Neck Now, Amy Bowers Cordalis, Nuwak, Rekwoi, Numite Wa, Wak Lao, Wak Lao, Wak Lao. I want to thank the Sunnyvale Library for having me here tonight. I want to thank all of you for coming and spending time here. And thank you for that introduction, Jack. I really appreciate it. Um, I don't know what else to add, or I don't have much more to add to my introduction other than I'm the mom of three, and my youngest is 5. And I just wanted to share, I'm not sure if you can see this or not. If well, maybe it'll, oh, you can't. That's too bad. My 5-year-old took the liberty of decorating my copy of The Water Remembers. And so even though you can't see it on the screen, he has outlined me, and there's some peanut butter and jelly stains on here and some of the pages. So, anyways, one of my biggest accomplishments is being a mama and passing down these traditions. And in many ways, the book and my desire to write the story the way I did stems from my family legacy and wanting to honor that, and also continue the family's legacy of fighting and teaching our children about those fights. And so that's really a big part of where the book came from. Excuse me. Before I get into the book more, I want to declare this virtual space as a safe place. So no matter who you are, where you're from, you know, um, any of it, this is a safe space for us to be in, to be together tonight. I am coming to you all from Southern Oregon. I'm about 45 minutes north of the former Klamath hydroelectric project area, the now freed Klamath River. And I'm in my kitchen, and I've got my slippers on and my fancy earrings for y'all. So I hope that wherever you are coming from, that you are feeling comfortable and safe, and maybe you have a cup of tea or something cozy, and we can be together in this space and be comfortable, right? And feel safe. That's what I hope for all of us for the next hour or so. And I think that safety is really important to come from a place of being safe in order to really talk about what I hoped the book would give people, which is hope. Um, we're obviously in a time politically, environmentally, where there are very difficult things happening, whether it's political crisis, environmental crisis. And I know that it feels hopeless in many ways. But what we have done on the Klamath, um, the story of the Water of Remembers, I really hope is an antidote to all of that. Because the story is one where, unlike so many other Indigenous based stories, the Indians won, y'all. We had a minor, or it's a really big victory, actually. Um, we undammed the Klamath River. Now, there are still two dams in the river, and I want to be clear about that, that do have fish passage. So, from the salmon's perspective, the river is free flowing, but we still do have more work to remove two other dams. But we did remove the four dams within the middle Klamath River. Um, Between the first dam came out in the end of 2023, and then the other three came down or came out in 2024. And the river is responding in ways that no one anticipated. The salmon have come back in numbers that nobody anticipated within about 3 days of the river reconnecting. Salmon went past the former hydroelectric project area, into spawning grounds that they hadn't been able to access in over 100 years. And they have repopulated about 300 miles of spawning habitat that the dams had blocked them from because the dams were built without any fish passage. So the river itself is stronger and more fierce than I have ever seen it in my lifetime. It is just stronger. If you are able, and I hope that through reading the book, that it helps people see the river in a different way. You know, at Yurok, we look at the river as our ancient relative. It's alive, it has a spirit. And for most of my lifetime, you know, I always thought that the river was so strong, but yet it was very polluted and its spirit was compromised. And now it is strong. It is so strong. And you really feel that when you go to the river, it is fiercer. The water is cleaner and cooler than I've ever seen it in my lifetime. Um, it used to be that when you were on the majority of the river, and the river itself is very big. It's a long river that straddles southern Oregon and northern California. And in most of it, it was just very polluted, and you could never see the bottom of the river. But now, almost through all of it, you can see the riverbed. It has this like sweet kind of smell, and all these different plants and different animals, otters, eagles, bears, deer, are coming back to the river. And even the little pollinators and the little bugs that are so important to ecosystem health, they're all coming back to the river. And in that way, the whole ecosystem, not just the river itself, but the riparian areas and the mountains around the river are becoming stronger. And so it's really this remarkable project. It is the world's largest salmon restoration project ever. And so going back to this notion of hope, you know, we worked on this project for 20 years, but what I do want to make clear is that that 20 years was just this like dedicated effort to Klamath Dam removal, but it was built on the legacy of several generations of my family's work and other Indigenous families in the Klamath. Um, but this message of hope is that we can do hard things. You know, when we work together, when we lean into our commonalities, when we move from a place of trying to find sustainable ways to live in or with diverse communities and diverse interests, we can really create remarkable outcomes. And that's what I hope that people take from the book, is that yes, we're in this hard moment, but it doesn't have to be that way. And we don't have to stop working. We don't have to, move to Mars, for example. Like we can stay here and we can work together to renew the world. So I wanted to be able to share that message and tell sort of my perspective of how we pulled it together in the book, and then of course ground it in an indigenous worldview because so much of this project was indigenous led. So I'm going to spend some time kind of just talking about Klamath dam removal and the bones of it. um, I I felt really uh, motivated to tell the story in the book in a way that was authentic to how my culture tells stories. Out at Yurok, we are a little background information about Yurok. We're the largest California tribe. Our Aboriginal territory is in most of the North Coast area, and into the inlands, in the first Siskiyou Cascade Range. And we're fishing people. We always have been along and in the Klamath River. And the way that we teach our children, the way that we hand down stories is through myths, right? Is through storytelling. And that storytelling still remains even grounded in Yurok worldview and Yurok language. I don't speak Yurok. I know some of it. I introduced myself that way, but even as an English, first language speaker, my family has dialect patterns that are based on the way that Yurok people speak and think. And so that is present in the book. And it was a fun thing because I had to work with my publisher a little bit to be like, okay, I'm going to be upfront with you all. Like, my sentences in this book may seem like they're run-on sentences, or the story may be circular, or the verb and the adverb or the noun may not be in a common English structure. But that is a reflection of Yurok worldview, of Yurok language. And my goal was to enhance the reader's experience by making sure that that was all present in the story. And really, what I wanted was to allow readers to come to the Klamath River, to sit on the river bar, um, with, campfire in front of us, maybe a gill net out, and we're fishing and we're listening to our elders tell all these stories. Um, and so that's why I wrote the book the way that it is done, through story, through sort of more circular kind of storytelling, and then also trying to put different Yurok myths, and very much all of it's grounded in the Yurok worldview. And I hope people enjoy it. I hope that you all enjoy it, and I hope that it allows you to kind of expand your mind and your way of thinking around how we can get to these, historic ecosystem changing, planet human saving type of projects. um, and to me, I think one of the most important things, and this is why I started the book with the Yurok creation story, and also the instructions that the creator gave us as Yurok people when the earth was created. Um, Through colonization, you can imagine we were not given the opportunity to share those instructions with others. Instead, we were subject to, murderous raids and genocide and assimilation and ecocide, all the things. But through all of that, we've been able to retain those important instructions from the creator about how humans are supposed to interact with the natural world to have balance. And really, I outline what those instructions are at the beginning of the book through the creation story, and also through the acceptance and the formation of the cultural covenant, right? Which was essentially that, and I think this applies to all humans if we accept it. The humans get to be the beneficiaries of all the abundance of the natural world, but our job is to live in balance with that and never take more than what we need, to steward those individual species and ecosystems and take care of them so that they regenerate. And in Yurok, we call that balance, right? We're living in balance. Other cultures could call it harmony. Other cultures may call it sustainability, but for Yurok, it's balance. And those were the instructions we were given. And so I wanted to start the book with those clear instructions so that readers had the opportunity to then, digest that and think about, like, what do those instructions really mean? And how do I, as a modern person with the ability to jump on a Zoom call with all these wonderful people from wherever we might be, how do I adopt those principles of balance? And what I wanted to do through the rest of the book was then show how my family has tried to work by, live by, implement those instructions from the creator through the generations, and how that then those instructions, that work, the duty of the humans to protect was then implemented to inform Klamath dam removal and the world's largest salmon restoration project. And so yeah, I hope that those instructions, that's something that readers can come away from and think about how you could implement that in your own life. So then the next piece of why I wanted to get the book out again was about just the story of Klamath dam removal. And there's so many powerful moments and also lessons learned from that. And the really what I when I think about it, and it was such an honor and privilege to be able to write the book because it gave me a lot of time to think about all this and to really reflect and then research. But we got there through four things. And first, it was ceremony. So much of what we do and I think this applies to most of Indian country and certainly Indian country on the Klamath River, is we pray and we're a ceremonial people. And our religion is based on world renewal. And I talk about one of those ceremonies in the book, the world renewal ceremonies in the book. And what was so powerful about all of it was we hadn't had those ceremonies in 100 years or so, and finally we have one. And then the end of the ceremony, the salmon start dying. And at that point, people didn't know if the medicine had gone wrong, if the dance had gone wrong. That's why the salmon were dying. Um, and of course, as we move through the fish kill, which is also in the book, largest fish kill in American history on the Yurok Reservation within the Klamath River, 70,000 adult salmon died. We learned that it was caused by really poor management practices at the order of the then Vice President Dick Cheney. But of course, we didn't know that when it was all happening. But what that ceremony did, and the death, and if you put it all together, the death of all those fish, what is the right word? Catalyzed a whole new generation of people into the Undam the Klamath movement and into the movement to preserve Yurok and other indigenous cultures and ways of life on the Klamath. And the conclusion I reach in the book is that really those salmon and the crater, perhaps they made a deal where they were going to die in order to alert the humans that we had to change the way that we managed the river, or the whole river was going to go away. And of course, that then pulls in this Yurok myth, which is if the salmon go away on the Klamath, then so too will the Yurok people. And so that existential threat and crisis, that act of ecocide against Yurok and all the indigenous peoples on the Klamath really then launched the movement. And so that was the role of ceremony. And from then, the second piece came in, which was grassroots activism. Um, there were die-hard activists who went around the world protesting at the stakeholder and shareholder meetings of the dam removal, excuse me, the dam owners company meeting. So at first it was in Scotland, and then the dams were sold to Pacificor Power, which is a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, which of course is owned by Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world. And so all of a sudden, the indigenous peoples from the Klamath Basin found themselves really in a war for their survival against one of the richest men in the whole world. But that didn't intimidate them, and they kept going and protested and raised public awareness about the harm that the dams were causing. And really, the harm was that the dams were built without fish passage, so the salmon couldn't get past the lowest dam, which is Iron Gate, and that meant they died trying, so they didn't spawn. Also, there were about 2,000 acres of reservoir behind the four different dams, and the water there would get really polluted and warm, and then it would flow all the way down river and pollute the whole entire river. It also blocked sediment from getting down river. And so it was just really harming the river, and our salmon runs were down to single digit percentages of their historical abundance. And so it was clear that, the dams, and they were a primary factor, although there were others, were really killing the river and the people, the indigenous people's lifeways who were dependent upon that. And so finally, through all this grassroots activism, sort of that, all of that was brought to the public awareness. And then there was a little bit of magic, which was that there was a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, proceeding to relicense the Klamath dams, which was a requirement to operate the dams. And so Pacificor requested renewal of the license for 50 years without any changes. And initially, the tribes were the first ones to call for dam removal. And so, in that regulatory proceeding, we argued for dam removal. And a lot of people thought we were crazy. A lot of people thought, oh, it'll never, that like there's never been a project, a dam removal project that large. It'll never work. You're going to release a bunch of toxic, bad stuff from the bottom of the reservoirs, and it's going to kill the whole river. This will never work. But we teamed up with the environmentalists, and eventually the issue went to trial, and we coupled the tribal rights and the environmental laws along with the federal power laws, and came up with really, really strong arguments. And some of those arguments were based on my great Uncle Ray's case, right? And how hard he had fought. And I'll get back to that. But we ended up winning in FERC on almost every single account. And then that led to settlement discussions, which then included an economic analysis that revealed it was cheaper to remove the dams than it was to install fish ladders. And that was a real turning point, because all of a sudden we had a common interest with our enemy, which was the finances of it all. Of course, as a corporation, they wanted to reduce their liability, reduce costs, make money. And we wanted the dams out. And it just turned out that removing the dams again was cheaper. And so there was our common interest. And that kind of goes to that practice point of like when you're thinking about these kinds of big ecosystem wide or any kind of like large project, leaning into our commonalities and figuring out where our mutual interest lies often leads us to, these remarkable outcomes. And so we entered into a $500 million settlement agreement. And what was really important was that through those settlement talks, and there were years of settlement talks, people worked together really closely, and people of different backgrounds, people of different, farmers, Indians, NGOs, state officials, federal officials, and we had been really in conflict with a lot of these folks for a very long time. And through those settlement discussions, we were able to share with them those original instructions with the creator or from the creator. And we talked with them about these principles of balance and world renewal. And through that, they learned. And also we learned about their livelihoods, their way of life. And that led to this settlement agreement that equally valued the rights of nature, the rights of indigenous peoples, and business. And the remarkable thing was that, through all of this, it was a good business deal, right? Because it was cheaper to remove the dams than it was to install these fish ladders, which the company would have had to do in order to get the license done. And then overall, the dam removal agreement, it ended up costing the company and ratepayers less than it would have to go through the whole relicensing proceeding. And so it was a good business deal. Um, and so that was sort of the law and policy piece of it. And then the final piece was really the leadership. We had incredibly strong tribal leaders who relied on elders who taught them about what the basin was like, pre-colonization. And having that indigenous knowledge, this anecdotal knowledge about how the basin worked together, that balance before that was all disrupted, was really powerful because it was almost like, the light at the end of the tunnel. Um, and what I learned from that is so often, to get a different outcome, you first have to be able to see it, right? And when you're working with people, they have to see it too. And so our indigenous leaders were able to come in with that knowledge and share that vision. And it was extremely powerful. Um, but also on the leadership side, there were state and federal leaders, and even eventually through the power company, there were executives who really stepped up and invested their time, their effort, their word on keeping the settlement agreement together and keeping uh, the project moving forward. And that is powerful. And one of the big messages out of Klamath dam removal is that there wasn't one champion of Klamath dam removal. There were thousands who worked in big and small ways over decades on a common goal. And that's how we got to the finish line. Um, and I share a story, there's a few of them, but one that comes to mind now, from the book is the chapter about Blue Creek versus the dams. There was a moment in 2020, and it was an awful moment. It was the pandemic, right? It was like the heart of the pandemic. And the dam removal or the dam, so we got a like a pre-order from FERC that really changed some things, and the power company threatened to pull out of the deal. And so our leaders at Yurok called the Pacific the Berkshire Hathaway executives to the reservation, and we took them up to Blue Creek, which is one of our sacred sites, and had a meeting there and let the river speak for itself. And just like the river always does, it saved the day and spoke very clearly. And I think really moved the power companies, executives like hearts and souls in a way that made it clear that, dam removal had to happen in order for this river to survive. And I think we also helped the river a little bit by threatening to launch a Standing Rock type protest, which of course was one of the largest protests of a power company in the United States. So we helped out a little bit, but that that was really one of those moments where things could have gone a very different way. And had we not had the strength of, and for us too, like bringing those folks to Blue Creek, which is one of our spiritual places, um having that ceremony and that spiritual connection to place and the power of those prayers, which of course, like, that makes me kind of think about the second part of the book and the role of Geneva Matz and how she fought through her life to keep that Indian way alive. And she did, and she passed it down to many, and there were many other Yurok elders that did the same. And so there we are in 2020, standing on the banks of Blue Creek. I think that Indian way really contributed to the power of the moment. But it also too was that leadership and making sure that people are, devoted to working together and finding solutions. So that's really how we got there. I felt so honored to have been able to represent Yurok as its lawyer through these negotiations and through the whole project. Um, and I'll never forget watching the river reconnect. And it was, I write about this in the book towards the end, and it was so hard to write about because it's almost impossible to give that moment justice in words. It was such a deeply healing experience to watch the river reconnect, the water reconnect after being blocked for 100 years. Um, so I did my best, but that moment, it made me really reflect on the human experience and the power of the choices we make. We're in this time right now where we have more access to information and technology and different places and ways of being. We have a million choices that we make in our lifetime, and I think often we feel like our choices don't matter, but they do. They really, really do. And I think when you devote your life to really leaning into whatever your life force is calling for, when you choose to lean into supporting sustainability, supporting collaboration, working with others, humans can do such remarkable things, like restore the third largest salmon run in all of the lower 48 states, like we did on the Klamath. Um, you really can do remarkable things. And so your choices, really, really matter. Also, I felt, watching the river heal in that moment on the river when it reconnected, but also um, having witnessed, this remarkable change in the river over the last year, the water really does remember. It remembers what to do where to go, how to function. And so do the salmon, so does the river, so does, the eagles and every little piece of the whole ecosystem and even the humans. Um, we all remember what it was like to be on a healthy planet. And I think we're all, even in our subconscious, trying to work on that and trying to get back to that sense of health and community. And what I witnessed, and I'm here to testify, is that when we devote ourselves to working on those things, we can start getting back to that. And I think it brings tremendous healing. It brings um, this higher consciousness where we can be together, we can work to restore ecosystems, and things start to feel better and get more healthy. So, the final kind of comments I'll make are that I also felt really strongly about sharing my family's story. Um, y- we in many ways have been very lucky to have survived colonization, survived genocide, and stayed on our lands and in our home waters, but it wasn't without a fight. And, the second part of the book and the work of my great uncle Raymond Matz, who was one of our freedom fighters, he was arrested 19 times just for fishing on his home waters. He was harassed, and I talked about in the book, the raids, the warrantless raids of his home. And that history isn't present in many of, our academic books or even just sort of in the common knowledge of the American public. The salmon wars, very few people have heard about those. But those were the Yurok people, the indigenous peoples of the Klamath, sort of like civil rights equivalent of like the 60s, the 70s. Those were our freedom fights. And so I wanted to have that history available, for anyone who was so inclined to read it. And I grew up hearing these stories. All the stories in the book, those were things that my family would sit around and talk about. Some of the hard things, not so much, but some of the big battles, the cat and mouse game with the state game wardens that both my great uncles used to do. And even some of the, just the powerful stories of grandma and great grandma in the boat and protesting. Um, those were things that we talked about around the dinner table. And I was always so amazed with the strength of the family to have taken those things on. And, I often ask, like, why did you do that? Because it put them at great harm and in great risk of harm. And they always said, because we have Indian rights, and those rights came from the creator. And I think it goes back to those original instructions about, one, the people being a part of the natural world and maintaining balance, but then also stewarding and protecting. And in order to do that, you have to have presence on the land, on the water, and you have to have rights. So anyways, I'm so honored to have been able to share this story. It's been one of the greatest privileges of my life, and I'm really honored to have been able to spend time with you this evening. And I hope you love the book. I hope you'll share it with your friends. And I'm really grateful for your time tonight, and I'd be happy to answer some questions. Waklau.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was incredibly illuminating, inspiring, and quite moving. So thank you so much for your time. And we do have some time for questions. So if you have any questions, please place them in the chat. If you don't mind, Amy, I'll kick things off so people can
Great.
start typing. I kind
Yeah.
of want to start off with this idea of storytelling because I think it's an underrated element of social reform and it kind of demystifies the idea. Like
Ooh.
you said that, anyone can make change, right? And storytelling plays a part in that. So I'm curious, how did you, as an attorney, how did you balance the hard facts of law and biology of the river with kind of the spiritual and ancestral memory of the Yurok people? And did that process, of the book or writing the book change how you view your own legal work? I'm curious.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's a great one. So one of the things that I observed from when we first started negotiations, or when I first started negotiations with the power company, was that we had to start by proving our existence, right? We had to start by saying, "Oh yeah, we're Indian people and we're still here and we still fish." And not only that, we have these really powerful federally reserved fishing rights, water rights that are the supreme law of the land. And so in times of conflict with other laws, they're supposed to be upheld. And these are powerful, powerful rights. But it took years to get to the status of the rights or the even just the talk and understanding of the rights because I had to start at we're still here. And what I realized coming out of that is who you are, your background, your influences, the stories you read, the things that you take in your everyday life obviously informs who you are when you sit down at the negotiation table. And I mean, sadly, Indigenous peoples, we're still just getting the opportunity to tell our stories. Hence, like I just published the book, and but what I realized is like storytelling, and telling stories in a narrative format, through experience, through adventure, playing up the emotional side of it is a really impactful way to communicate your experience with others because folks tend to be more vulnerable when they're reading, a novel or nonfiction narrative, in their comfort of their own homes, or if they're watching something on TV. And so I wanted to write this book in that format where I would hope that folks would be able to, pick it up and digest at their leisure and feel comfortable and vulnerable. Um, and maybe they see a bit of themselves or their family experience in the story. Maybe it helps them develop empathy. Um, I guess that's, and the power of storytelling too. I mean, and that was the other thing about just Klamath Dam removal was it's such a powerful, hopeful story. But if we don't take the time to actually tell the story in a narrative format, then that reduces its impact because people don't hear about it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And then speaking on the removal, then with the dams coming down, the river seems to be entering a sort of a healing phase. Um,
Mhm.
what is what is that currently looking like? Like what has actually changed, and then what does that look like in the next maybe 5 to 10 years? And what are some of the obstacles that you and Ridges to Riffles and the communities along the river still are facing right now?
Yeah, so I think there's two questions in there, like what's the status of the river and then what's the future. So we've had a remarkable year on the Klamath. The last dam came out at the end of 2024, which I write about in the book. And so, the last 2025 was a year of deep observation and sort of seeing what happens. Um, I mean, first, sort of the big, shiny, exciting point is, the salmon about, I think it was, yeah, 3 days later from removing the dams, they came back and went past. the former dam sites into historical spawning grounds. And then this year, when the adult salmon came back, they went further up into their spawning grounds. And so they're jamming. Like they're very happy. They're doing what they do. We also are engaged in restoration projects throughout the whole former hydroelectric project area. And one of the things that Ridges to Riffles is leading is this group called the IPAC group, which is essentially an advisory board of indigenous peoples from the tribes within the basin who are put in the management seat to guide this restoration work, which is awesome because then it allows that indigenous knowledge I was talking about earlier to inform and work with the Western science to do all these restoration projects. And so they've planted 19 billion native seeds within the former hydroelectric area, and they're reconnecting the tributaries. They've gotten these cold water springs so that they are now flowing into the Klamath. And so it's really just remarkable. The other thing is that removing the dams has paved the way for the indigenous peoples of the dam removal or the dam project area to restore their relationship to the land. So Shasta Nation was right around the Copco Reservoir area, and their villages, their sacred sites, their burial grounds were all underwater. And now, when the reservoir was drained and the riverbed is back, they have access to these places. And actually, they have gotten about 1,300 acres back in their own ownership. And then there's another Klamath Indigenous Land Trust that is working to get some more land back within the former hydroelectric project area that they will manage until the other tribes with Aboriginal ties in that area can take those back. And so it's paving the way for restoring these deep, relationships with the land and working towards it doesn't completely make right those historical injustices, but it does help to address some of those. So it's a big time of healing. What I will say is I know I am really trying to follow the salmon's lead, which means the salmon are now reconnecting all the people within the basin, right? It used to be that the end of the line for salmon on the Klamath was at River Mile 190, which was the lowest dam, Iron Gate Dam, and that was it, which basically cut the basin in half. Now that those dams are out and the salmon have gone home, we are all united, right? We are all brought into one, and even more so than before, what they do at the top of the basin impacts, my neck of the woods at the mouth down at the village of Reckwoy. And so what we're trying to do is help facilitate this sort of shift in paradigm that used to be a very colonial perspective of putting us in this place of scarcity where there wasn't enough for everybody. But now what we're trying to do is go back to a mindset of gratitude and abundance and working together to share the basin's resources with farmers, right? With ranchers, with tribal people, with recreation. Um, and so that really does guide us. Our obstacles are significant. So there are still two dams at the top part of the basin. They have fish passage. And so, the fish can get past those areas. They're not great, but we do need to figure out their long-term plan, whether that's removal or significant modifications to make it more environmentally and fish friendly. And I would say the biggest one that we're facing right now is from the Trump administration, which issued a new legal memorandum in January that threatens to essentially dewater the Klamath River at the Oregon California state line. So that is a very significant threat, and we are working with people in the basin to try to figure out, how do we work collaboratively and continue our approach of balance and of sustainability for all communities under these very significant threats to the future of the river and the indigenous peoples of the river.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
that, Amy. Question from the chat here.
Mhm.
After so many years of multiple generations of salmon, how did the salmon know that the river is now no longer dammed within 3 days? Did they just keep going upstream? Question mark. I think this kind of speaks to the title, maybe.
I love this question. Thank you so much. So, that's what everybody wondered. Like, how did they know? What did they know? What did they know? So, the salmon historically, they spawned up behind the former dam sites. So that was like the core DNA footprint is like one, salmon, their life cycle is such that they spawn till they die and they are on a mission as soon as they get back into the river, and they will die trying to get back to their home waters, right? Because they spawn wherever they are born. Um, and there were a gazillion studies, multiple studies about fish and what they would do after the dams were removed. Those studies all said, oh, well, the salmon won't remember. They won't go back for at least 5 years. It could be 10 years. It could be 20 years, but it's going to take a really long time. Oh no, 3 days later, bam, there they went. And so it defied all modern science. Like nobody ever expected that. And, so there really isn't um, I will phrase it this way. Like, how did they do that? To answer that question, and I am not a biologist, but I work a lot with a lot of what we call fish heads who are hardcore biologists. And I think the closest sort of Western science analogy or thing to it could be that salmon are always looking for good spawning habitat. And so if they smell that there's good spawning habitat nearby, if the water is cool enough, like they will continue to search. And so maybe that explains some of it, but really not all of it. I think from a tribal perspective, we just understand that these species have a home and they also have DNA that is, driving them to their home. It's just like us as Yurok people. One of the things my dad always says is that we've been fishing the same runs of Klamath salmon for so long that we now share each other's DNA, which I guess would suggest that I'm part fish. But in any event, I think those from a Yurok perspective, like those, you're right, Jack, like they just really remembered because it's in their blood, it's in their DNA, and it always brings them home. So, yeah. And it's a great lesson for us humans, right? Is like we think we're so smart and, our metrics and ways of thinking explain everything. And no, that's not the case. So.
That's awesome. Another question in the chat.
Mhm.
Speaking about this idea of hope, Christina's asking, how do you stay motivated when, this timeline seems so long, so extensive, and, I'd imagine it feels very overwhelming, especially working against essentially the American government, the idea of
Mhm.
capitalism. How do you maintain a sense of hope throughout this entire process and moving forward?
So a really good question. I um a couple things. So the timeline. The dams were in the water or in the river for about 100 years, which is the blink of an eye for the river. And I write about how my Uncle Leonard had made that comment the first time he saw the Klamath dams removed. The first time he saw the free flowing river, he declared it was like those dams were never even there. And I think that when we're working on changing structural or society regimes or oppressive systems or even worldviews, we have to look at it in the long run. And what I feel really thankful for is being grounded in Yurok culture and also a family, that has fought for these generations. And so when I think about the contributions that I've made, I try to tap into that intergenerational consciousness that um, shows me then that okay, I may, make just a little bit of progress in my lifetime, but the next generation will come and they will make progress, and so on and so forth. And I think when you do that and when you look at it in this sort of bigger intergenerational consciousness, it it makes you feel bigger than yourself, right? Because it's not just about your own ego. It's not just about, oh, what am I going to do with, this my few years? It's that, no, I'm a part of this larger community, this larger ecosystem, this larger and it is a structure and tribe and way of being that continually operates to advance those instructions from the creator. And that then really feels empowering because it's bigger than yourself. And you get to be a part of this big, great movement. And that I think that all humans can tap into that intergenerational consciousness and also um work and whatever your heart calls you to, right? Like learn about it, learn about the history, learn about like, and then think about what are your ideas for the future and how can you contribute and what communities can you be a part of? And I hope that's another thing that people take from reading the book is like we're all humans and we're all in this together. And when we work together and when we know our history and when we think really hard with intention about what our future could be, like it gives you hope. And I think too, one of the things is like, yeah, we're in a really hard time, but it's not going to last forever, right? And what we need to be doing is focusing on like, what's our recovery plan? Like that I think is a more proactive, more hope generating approach than doom scrolling, for example. Don't doom scroll whatever you do. So yeah, those are, I guess, a couple of answers there. I hope that's helpful.
Those are some beautiful sentiments, and I think a really wonderful way to end the conversation, Amy. Thank you so much for your presentation and for being with us tonight. It was really such a treat to
Mm.
have you. The book is The Water Remembers: My Indigenous Family's Fight to Save a River and a Way of Life. The library just recently purchased it. It's on its way, so be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, I highly encourage folks in the meeting to visit Amy's website to watch both of those
Yeah.
short films, Undammed and Our Secret Obligation. They're both less than a half hour long, and they're incredibly moving and really well done. So take a peek at that. And Amy, do you have any departing thoughts for our audience tonight, other than what you just said?
Well, sleep is so important in winter
Yep.
time and restoring our souls. So, be like the earth right now and germinate and, sort of refill your soul so that when you're ready, you can go out into your community and bring light and love. And I just have so much belief in all of you, and I hope that the book makes you feel good, makes you feel like you can do something good because I know you can, and I'm really, really grateful for your time. Thank you, Wak Lao.
Thank
And
you again,
thank you so
Amy.
much for having me, Jack. This
Oh
was
my God, it was such a
wonderful.
pleasure. Thank you so much, and
Thank
thank you
you.
all for being here tonight.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you guys later. Thanks
Okay.
again.